after you've run 15 experiments where you've tweaked this and tweaked that. So what if you finally find one that works? I'm not going to be real impressed. You might get it published in the journal, maybe, maybe not. Same sort of thing with other methods. I just use that one because I think it's a little more accessible to many of us. But we can have the same sort. We just throw stuff at the wall without thinking carefully about construct measurement. Well, that's the way the dominant article in the field's measured it. Whoopee, I still think it's poor. Let's develop a new one. I don't know how many times I might have had that conversation with some of my students. Don't measure it. Don't use this measure unless you think it's a good measure. I don't care if it's going to be easier in the review process. Measure it that way, and then measure it the way you think is better. That way you're safe. You shouldn't just start a new measure. If there's a real dominant one, you always want to measure it that way too. Realism. But you'll often find this can be helpful then in the review process. The one that you think is more theoretically sound based on the domain of the construct actually works better, lo and behold. So it can be efficient as well, save you time. So theory is not just good in its own right, it's useful. Even for folks who are in areas that maybe don't value theory quite as much, it's still useful for them. So what are some actionable guidance ideas for developing theory? Now, these are not an exhaustive list, but these are some of the things that I suggest as ways to consider how to make a theoretical contribution. Some of that would be more theory maintenance. But then I actually go into my own articles and I tell them, now you go read my article and you tell me which of these happened there. So they can see tangible ways that, well, why did this article get in JMR? Okay, what was the contribution? Why did it make a contribution? Can you find some of these aspects to it? And it starts to get them to link different ways to make a theoretical contribution, rationalize to opposing theories that have contrasting predictions, integrating two theories in a new way, identifying, filling a gap in theory, a theoretical explanation for puzzling previous findings, not just, oh, they're puzzling, but a grounded theoretical explanation for why. Identifying boundary conditions or extending theory beyond previous boundary conditions, either of which can be useful. Demonstrating shortcomings or misinterpretation of a frequently studied construct. These are just some examples of ways I give them to think about theory development, theory extension, maybe what we're calling theory maintenance. Identifying meeting paths, examining new constructs or alternative explanations. Those are just some of the ones that I come up with. Again, it's not an exhaustive list. You might have others. But my point is, I think, by giving some more tangible examples and then having them try to go and look at published articles and apply these type of things, they start to see how they could do that themselves. It makes it more achievable, more attainable. So, and finally, we really have to be realistic about this. There's got to be rewards for theory use and development, or else we just have to tell our doctoral students, okay, we're going to train you now, but you're going to have to play the game the way you get rewarded until you're at least an associate professor, maybe a full professor, and then you can actually pursue these. I mean, we've got to be realistic. So what does that include? It's got to be journal acceptance, editors and reviewers. I don't know who the reviewers are who are killing everything because nobody ever admits to it. We've looked in the mirror and the enemy is us.
Why don't we have a show of hands?
I mean, who are these mystery people? Somehow they never go to conferences, apparently. I mean, let's do a little self-examination there. What are we doing? Another thing I think we really do need to do, so this is sort of like the first is more positive, this is more the negative. Maybe we have to really start to try to devalue a theoretical standalone research. I'm not talking about early stage inductive that goes toward building, and I'm not talking about research that it takes one research context and then elaborates and extends and builds a theory. I'm talking about stuff that looks like it's a consulting project, and there's really no attempt to go beyond there. I'm sorry, I think we really do need to devalue that. I'm very tolerant of virtually all types of research, but some things I think we have to start thinking about, maybe being opposite that. tenure reviews, the role of citations. You know, when I was a doctoral student, everybody said getting citations is really important. And suddenly, once you had more of the quantitatively heavy articles that getting like 8 citations is a big deal, suddenly citations aren't really that important anymore. Wait a minute. We're changing the rules of the game here. Either they were important or they're not. Obviously, there are exceptions. There are some very great quantitatively based articles that are very widely cited. So don't use this as an argument for, well, citations aren't really a viable metric. I'm sorry, whatever kind of method you're using, if you're making something that is truly a contribution, odds are good you're going to get some citations for it. And by some, I mean more than 2. You and, your friend. So anyway, don't give up the fight. Secure the home front, protect your current territory, establish alliances, and strive to gain or retake strategic ground. But for heaven's sake, don't give up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, we are going to thank you for your patience as we waited through the presentations. I was hoping to have at least about 45 minutes at the end, but we have about 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes. There's a reception at 6 o'clock. If we can push it to 6:05 or something like that, there's a burning desire to ask questions, and I hope you do have a burning desire for questions. So if I could invite all the speakers to actually come to the front of the room, please. We have 2 microphones. I hope you'll use this time to kind of reflect on the notes that you've been taking, the questions that you may have. You can direct it to the entire group, and people can comment on it. Or if you have a specific question for a speaker based on what they presented, you're welcome to do that as well.
That's great.
Thank you.
I've never been in a 5-hour session before. You guys. Awesome.
Well, we'll see if it's going to be 5 hours and 1 minute. If there's any questions, there you go. So are we open for questions then?
Yes.
Okay.
Could you turn the microphone on, please?
You gotta grab it and pass it to each other, right?
Got it. Did you have a question?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a question for Shelby, I guess, also for Lisa. So I guess I was thinking about developing really new theory and kind of incrementing or like extending a theory and kind of touch upon that. And with your schema, I was thinking, is the schema the same you would use for developing something really new, like really radical, or like, hey, this is a phenomenon which cannot be explained before by any of the existing theories on the health anything? Or is it like, could there be some differences in the schema for these 2 things?
Is your question, what's the difference between a schema and, is your question, what's the difference between a schema and,
I guess it's more to do with the creative processes you were talking about. Should it be like, is it similar? Does it have to be built upon like previous knowledge, or is there any difference you would have in these creative processes for developing really new theory and extending the theory? Or
excuse me, occasionally I have to think about these things. No, the word schema is the singular of schemata. And usually that means a conceptual schema or a conceptual scheme for organizing something. So for example, the 3 dichotomies model of marketing, which was published in 1976 and was the foundation for the Little Green Book, the very first version of marketing theory, says that we can take all of marketing and put it within one conceptual schema based on the 3 dichotomies, which gives us 8 different cells. So, but a schema by itself is a classification system. It's not a, normally anyway, it's a classification system. It's not a theoretical structure that has explanatory power or predictive power. I think that's what you were asking me.
Well, I'm going to answer the question I want to answer instead of the one that was asked. I guess my basic answer to your question from my perspective is that I think the processes, at least for me, are very similar. And I think if you start with like a small aha and you give it more thought and develop it more, it can become a wow. And so what I try to promote very much in especially early stage doctoral students is whatever you are going to pitch to me, I want to know what's the aha part. And the aha should be something that's not going to be intuitively obvious to the majority of the population. So if it's just some sort of incremental extension, that's not something that's going to excite me very much at all. That's not an aha. That's like yeah, whatever. So to me, it's just that notion of the aha moment. And if you try, I think, to go for the touchdown with the wow, you might not get there. But if you start small and you build on it, and then you get more depth in it, you talk to some of your fellow scholars, your professors, maybe go to conferences, and then you might find out, oh, there's another theory base out there that might intersect with where I'm going, and that will enable me to develop this much further. I think a lot of times those little advances can become bigger ones. So, especially with doctoral students, I don't know if you're a doctoral student or not, to me, trying to go for the touchdown in one pass is really scary. But those little ahas are easier, and once you start to be able to find the little ones, I think it becomes easier to find the bigger ones. You can do it.
No, thank you.
I have a question. I learned a lot today about theory building, theory construction, but I want to ask you all, how do you think about the source of data or where to test your theory? Because I'm a doctoral student, I think one challenge for me is to get field data. What I can get access to is lab data. But when I talk to a communication professor asking about field lab data and the data from Amazon Turf, he said he would not suggest me to collect the data like this because he thought that that is not a good convincing data source. So I want to ask your perspectives about how do you think about the data quality from Amazon Turf, and do you have preference for field data to lab data in general? So that's my question.
There's more than one way.
There's multiple ways of collecting or testing and validating theories. If we only go one route, whether it's, say, experiments, and you mentioned lab experiments,